The major clash is now unfolding between President Trump and his battle against some of America's top universities, announcing this evening more than $2.2 billion in federal funding has been frozen for multi-year grants and contracts at Harvard. That comes after Harvard said tonight that it was rejecting a list of demands from the administration on sweeping changes and would fight back against them. Those demands came from a federal task force that the administration says is combating anti-Semitism on college campuses following protests against the war in Gaza. But the list of demands included things like dismantling diversity initiatives, auditing academic and hiring practices, and also installing leaders who are committed, the White House said, to implementing the changes they want to see. We saw a response from Harvard tonight and the legal team responding to that, saying, quote, "The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government." Now, Harvard's $9 billion that's at stake here is just a fraction of the billions that the Trump administration has been targeting at schools across the country. Harvard's decision, though, appears to be the first time that we have seen a school directly refusing to comply. This comes as the Harvard faculty chapter of the American Association of University Professors and its national counterparts sued the Trump administration. My source tonight is the Harvard law professor and general counsel of the organization. At the heart of this lawsuit, Andrew Manuel Crespo, is here in his first TV interview since that suit was filed. And so thank you so much, sir, for being here. Given all of these developments happening tonight, can I first just get your response to the administration saying tonight that it's going to have this $2.2 billion freeze? What kind of impact does that have?
Well, thanks so much for having me. And while this cut is obviously deeply disappointing and a real blow, not just to Harvard, but to higher education across the United States, it's not exactly unexpected. The Trump administration has been threatening to withhold and then withholding millions and then billions of dollars from some of the leading institutions of higher education in the country. The impacts of those cuts will be severe, not just to cutting-edge research, cures for cancer, cures for diseases, studies that try to understand the most cutting-edge technology, but also all of the work that happens at these universities with respect to how we study our history, the things that are essential to our democracy. There's a lot that happens at these universities that are essential to having a free democracy, and that's, I think, exactly the reason why they're all under attack. So the impact is significant, but I'm really proud to see Harvard standing up to fight.
Well, you filed your lawsuit before we saw how Harvard was going to respond tonight, and essentially you were arguing that the threat to cut this funding violates free speech and other First Amendment rights here. Given Harvard is the first school that we've seen respond this way, how does that impact your lawsuit, and what does that mean for this going forward?
Well, I think the Trump administration's decision to cut $2.2 billion from Harvard tonight makes clear just how essential this lawsuit is and how critical this fight is, and why it's so important for Harvard and really every university in the country to take a stand at this critical moment, because this is a clear, unquestionable violation of First Amendment rights. You mentioned some of the demands that the administration has made of Harvard. It includes things like trying to appoint a federally named oversight official to do an audit of every course, every department at Harvard to see if we have ideological balance to meet the Trump administration's test for what we teach and what we say at these universities. It's a transparent effort to change what is taught, what we say in our classrooms, what we teach our students, to make sure that the only things that are actually said on university campuses are things that the Trump administration wants to hear and wants to be said. This is a move that happens in countries across the world when there are efforts to try to make an authoritarian play in government. Institutions that are essential to civil society, like the press, like the courts, like the legal profession, and universities, are the first to come under attack. And that's what we've been seeing over the first few weeks of this administration, with that attack on universities coming full and hard now. And this is the moment when it's so essential for those universities to take a stand. And if there's any university in the world that has the resources to do that and the moral leadership to do that, it's Harvard. And I'm proud to call myself a member of this faculty today.
And so when the administration is arguing that this is actually about combating anti-Semitism and how we saw a lot of these schools handle this last year as the war in Gaza was playing out, and the attorneys acknowledged tonight in their letter denying that they're going to comply with the demands. They say, quote, Harvard is a very different place than it was a year ago. You're saying you don't essentially buy that that is what the administration is trying to accomplish here.
That's exactly right. Look, I've spent my professional life fighting racism and intolerance in the United States. Anti-Semitism is vile and has no place in this country. But these actions are not about anti-Semitism, they're about authoritarianism. And we know that because we can see what the Trump administration has said and what it has done. This is a president who, when he was campaigning for office, said that he didn't like what was taught at America's universities and that he was going to bankrupt them unless they started teaching something different. We can see this when we see the head of the task force that's responsible for these investigations saying that this is about ideological viewpoint balancing at these universities. We can see it when we see the Vice President of the United States say that universities and their professors are the enemy. This is not about anti-Semitism. This is about an effort to try to break the backs of American universities until they start saying what the administration wants to hear. Because the administration knows that universities are a central component of a free and open constitutional democracy. The Trump administration's demand letter that was made public today and sent to Harvard on Friday asked...
Wait, I want that quote. This is about an ideological viewpoint. Who said that? Can somebody find me that quote?
For things that have nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It requires us to try to change who is hired, what we teach in our classrooms, what we say in our research. It says that it is trying to create ideological rebalancing. That's code, and actually not even code. It's pretty transparent. That is a message that's saying, we don't like what you're teaching, we want you to teach something more to our liking, and unless you do that, we're going to try to bankrupt your institution.
We'll be following it closely. Andrew Manuel Crespo, thank you for joining us tonight for an interview.
Schools that persist in explicit, unlawful discrimination under the guise of equity will not only have their endowments taxed, but through budget reconciliation, I will advance a measure to have them fined up to the entire amount of their endowment.
I think if any of us want to do the things that we want to do for our country and for the people who live in it, we have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country.
Jesus.
Joining the group chat today, Phil Mattingly, CNN anchor and chief domestic correspondent, Gabby Birnbaum, Washington correspondent for the Nevada Independent, and Kevin Fry, Washington correspondent for Spectrum News, New York One. Everybody, I want to just start with what the president is trying to do, because in that old clip we played, he talked about taxing endowments, which is not what he's doing, right? He's specifically saying, here's a list of demands, comply, or I'm going after your federal funding. So sort of who in the administration is pushing this? What can you tell us about the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, why slog through a legislative process that you don't know how it's going to end when you can just do it yourself? And I think this is so people cannot view what's happening here in isolation, right? We've been talking about this for the last several months, where the agility and kind of relentless nature with which the Trump administration and top senior advisors who have been planning for this for several years have really, to your point, initially bent institutions that never saw this coming, even though Trump talked about it on the campaign trail, to their will, has been something that people are just starting to kind of get their head around. And Harvard being the first school to say no is a fascinating moment to see whether this is the start of a tipping point.
And if there's any school that can do it, it's Harvard. It has a massive endowment. But meanwhile, Columbia faced a similar predicament, quickly caved. Kevin, talk about the dynamics there that are different.
Right. I mean, look, they were the center point of the anti-Semitism accusations early on. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik and other top lawmakers in Washington have been very loudly condemning what happened there, because they really became the face of the protest movement.
And that made them vulnerable to public backlash and vulnerable to political backlash.
Correct. And you also saw those dramatic images that played out when you saw the police go onto campus and they took over the building. And I mean, this kind of built and built and built. And so they were already under the microscope in that respect. And then they come in and they basically comply with a lot of what the administration is looking for, including sort of this mask ban and other sort of curriculum oversight, including on their Middle East studies program. And then on top of that, there's now conversations about whether or not there should be some sort of judicial oversight of whether or not they are in compliance.
Right. I don't want to just skip by some of the things you said. Oversight into actual curriculum. So we want to tell you, or at least be able to look at what you're teaching, which is ironic since they're kind of dismantling the ed department. But they want to do this in higher ed. Democrats and their allies coming to universities' defense. Here's a sense of what they've been saying.
Is putting pressure on universities as well. Good news is Harvard University today said, go to hell.
That may break the fever. I really hope it does. I do know this. if Harvard had capitulated, I really fear for what next year would be.
There are things that matter more than simply the size of one's endowment. We need the presidents to be banding together and standing up for free expression.
Gabby, I probably could have stopped with Clyburn because he really lays out the stakes. But what are you hearing in congressional delegations? What are you hearing in your reporting about people seeing this as like a pivotal moment?
I think Democrats in general have been waiting for somebody, some institution, some group to stand up and say, you know, we're not going to abide by this. And I think Harvard, right, the big dog of academia doing it, I think we'll see, but I would imagine gives permission for some smaller universities, those with endowments that aren't as large, that don't have that, you know, multiple hundreds of years history to say we can outlast any one political moment or administration, to sort of band with them. And I think we'll see some former Biden legal officials have talked about law firms need to do the same, that if they stand together, it'll be easier to stand against some of this rhetoric and action coming from the Trump administration. And so I'll see what moves forward.
Wow. I think I'm going on some panel show in like 30 minutes to argue this. I don't know if I'll stream or not. What are the possible counter arguments? How can anybody be okay with this? I feel like the whole argument, if there's, depending on who else is on there, is going to be that it's just about anti-Semitism, I guess. I don't know. I saw the Boasberg stuff. We might go over that after the show. Well, I guess we can listen to Fox News.
So let's talk about Ivy League colleges. And we know that the anti-Semitism raging on some of the most elite institutions in our country has to be addressed. And as soon as Barnard got raided a couple of months ago by anti-Semitic activists from Colombia, they knew the president, this was his first opportunity to address it. So he took $400 million from them. And he said, do these 5 things or 8 things if you want to get it back. And they're still in discussions. When it came to Harvard and the threats against Harvard to straighten out their curriculum, to straighten out the anti-Semitism on their campuses,
straighten out the curriculum,
to start complying with some regulations that the administration put out, Harvard pushed back and they said, we will not. And the president answered back last night by saying, if you will not, we're taking $2.5 billion from your grant system.
So there's this task force that is trying to get that money. Harvard, essentially, they've come back and they've said, you know what the administration is asking us to do is unconstitutional. It also flies in the face of our First Amendment rights. The president of Harvard, a fellow by the name of Alan Garber, sent a letter to the community to explain it. He said, although some of the demands outlined by the government are aimed at combating anti-Semitism, the majority represent direct governmental regulation of the intellectual conditions at Harvard. We have informed the administration through our legal counsel that we will not accept their proposed agreement. The university will not negotiate over its independence or its constitutional rights. So they've been hit with this $2.2 billion federal freeze. But here's the thing. I would imagine this is a battle that Harvard's going to fight, because while that's $2 billion, they've got an endowment at Harvard of $53 billion. So they've got a pile of dough they could rely on if they're going to fight this.
So the president's freezing $2.2 billion on grants, $60 million in contracts. President Obama applauded this because it's his alma mater, but Elise Stefanik also graduated from Harvard, and she was on Sean's show last night sounding off about it. But here's my question, Lawrence. Why should police officers, why should teachers, why should bricklayers and our blue-collar workers and the people in Detroit making our cars, why should they have to pay for schools that will continue and allow anti-Semitism on their campus?
God.
Because that's what happens. These are tax dollars. Harvard does have this huge endowment, and let all of that money go to community colleges. Let it go to Mike Rowe, who's starting trade schools. Allow that money to go toward individuals who are working hard in America and never would have gotten into Harvard or can't afford Harvard.
True. Fuck higher education.
You're exactly right.
You're so right. Queen.
They are not only anti-Semitic, but they allow people in on these visas that essentially hate the country. They want to redo what America is. And they have been very vocal about the people that have been deported by the president as a result of them violating their visa. The second thing is they don't want cops on their campus as well. A lot of these campuses shun law enforcement, don't want them there, and feel like they're an enemy to the American people, which we know is untrue. Let's talk with some of the diners right now and see what they're. Go ahead.
One of the lawyers fighting for Harvard is Robert Hur. Famously did the Hur report on Biden, and the other one's a conservative too, so they think they have an advantage there. I would say this. They're going to have to evaluate. They're going to have everything under scrutiny. Why they're taking so many international students? What countries are contributing to their institution? What is in their curriculum? They're going to have to expose it all because the administration is just amping it up. Princeton's all.
Look, see, everybody's always like, well, regulating free speech would be super hard. Who could we trust to do it, right? You can't have a commission. Do you trust the government to regulate? Well, look, see, conservatives are saying they can do it. So I guess there was never any problem with that. It was always okay to trust the government to regulate our freedoms. It just depends on who's in office, huh?
Also fighting. Colombia's capitulating as of now. Maybe when they get a permanent president, they might change. But go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah, you're exactly right, though, Brian. Let's go find some folks to talk to. Hey, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, man.
So Harvard, they're not going to comply with the administration. They said get rid of the anti-Semitism. The people that hate our country, that want visas, we're going to start revoking those visas. Harvard, as a result, have said, well, we don't want the money then. We're not going to negotiate with the administration. Where do you stand on?
I stand 100% behind Donald Trump's decision to not fund them.
Thank God.
People that work against this country are totally wrong. The woke need to wake up.
Yeah, wake the fuck up,
and
wokies.
Get on the right side of what's going on. 1 minute they're saying one thing, next minute they're saying the other thing. They're doing
that
a lot of
definitely
flip-flopping,
describes the
and
left.
I'm totally against it. You know, this is our country. We need to stand up for this country. I was a 9/11 first responder.
Oh, thank God.
I love our cops. I
Oh,
love our military.
amen.
And
Amen,
people
brother.
need to do the right thing by
Amen,
us
brother.
first, and that's it.
Hell yeah, brother.
What about you? A lot of people agree with you too, sir. He's talking about 9/11, and you see these people protesting in the middle of the street. Some of them are not even American citizens.
Oh my God, not even American
citizens. They want to
citizens.
overthrow a lot of the government. Some of them have been extremely anti-Semitic. Is the president making the right move here?
I love him. I think he's doing a great thing.
I love him.
I'm behind him.
I love
1,000%.
I love him. I love
the man
Trump.
doesn't really make too many mistakes.
And then Winston looked at the TV and he said, and he realized, I love Big Brother. Isn't that the last words in 1984? Or is it he loved Big Brother? I don't remember.
When he talks. He was right about most things.
He was right
And
about
I'm for
basically
him
everything.
100%.
Let's be honest. Is Trump ever
It's
wrong?
been a great time here with a lot of these folks right here. They've been talking about some of the issues that matter to the country so much, and this is one of them. We got to protect our country, and it starts with these children that are on these college campuses.
Hey,
guys.
Lawrence, look over your right shoulder.
Yeah,
That's
Lawrence.
the town
Yeah.
supervisor, Joe
My right
Saladino.
shoulder.
Right there with that gray suit on. Tell him to wave.
Where's Joe? Yeah, that's
Go
Joe.
chat with him. This is the guy in charge.
He said he grew up with you.
Right. He would, but I think he's a Chaminade guy, though.
Spill the tea on Brian.
So Joe has been. He's been giving me all the dirt on Brian.
Oh, good.
And I prepared a dossier, and at some point I will release it on Fox and Friends.
And you
but
remember
I'm
Joe-
not prepared to do it this morning.
Is it a dirty dossier?
Right, no.
Player Massapequa's ever had. Great athlete, great guy, amazing family. Brian is the real deal.
All right, Joe.
How much did you pay him?
But
There
he
you
also tried to get Teddy Roosevelt's
So
statue
wholesome,
when they
LOL.
tried to get rid of it.
I
He was
remember.
going to bring it to Long
I
Island.
remember that too.
All right.
All right,
Well,
thanks, guys.
All right, we'll check with you again. Thanks, Lawrence.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most
Kill me.
compelling analysis.
I'm compelled. Look at how they're all friends, guys. Carlin was right. It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
And welcome back here. Sue Live now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. What we want to do right now is take
Andrew
up some time to
Crapper?
kind of
Bro, what are
dive
these
into in
names?
detail for you this brewing battle between the Ivy League campuses like Harvard and Columbia and the Trump administration. Our colleague Fox's Rebecca Castor has a look at this battle. Let's watch.
The Trump administration is not soon forgetting the widespread pro-Palestine protests that swept across university campuses last year. Some of the international student leaders are facing deportation, and now federal funding is on the line.
We have been addressing the issue of anti-Semitism on campuses.
Why no foundries on Navis? I haven't decided if they're worth it or not yet.
There's been some grant funding and contract funding that we've reviewed, and some we've canceled and some we've put on hold.
Harvard is the latest school to have billions in federal grants and contracts put on hold after university leaders refused government demands, including to eliminate DEI programs, report foreign students here on visas who violate codes of conduct, and return to merit-based hiring and admissions.
These higher ed institutions that have fundamentally lost their way, U.S. taxpayer dollars should never be propping up anti-Semitism.
Harvard is the seventh school targeted by the Trump administration, but it's the first to push back, with the university's president saying in part, quote, "No government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue."
Harvard University today said, go to hell.
Harvard's move also drawing praise from alum and former President Barack Obama, who says other institutions should follow suit. Harvard says it has already taken action against anti-Semitism on campus and argues many of Trump's demands are not related. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
Rebecca, thanks so much. Let's read in full former President Barack Obama's statement there just last night on X. He says this: Harvard has set an example for other higher ed institutions, rejecting an unlawful and ham-handed attempt to stifle academic freedom while taking concrete steps to make sure all students at Harvard can benefit from an environment of...
Wait, what do your trains ship then? Do your trains ship ore, or do your trains ship liquid stuff?
Intellectual inquiry, rigorous debate, and mutual respect. He says, let's hope other institutions follow suit. This was a focal point of the questioning to Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today as well. Here's a brief moment. Let's watch.
Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. To follow up on something that you just said, why do Ivy League schools get so much federal funding?
Yeah.
It's a very good question, and it's a question the president has obviously raised in his discussions and negotiations with not just Harvard, but also Columbia and many other Ivy League institutions. We have the Anti-Semitism Task Force, which the president promised and delivered on. The Anti-Semitism Task Force is across the government, representatives from various federal agencies who meet on a weekly basis to discuss the question that you just raised. And I think a lot of Americans are wondering why their tax dollars are going to these universities when they are not only indoctrinating our nation's students, but also allowing such egregious illegal behavior to occur. The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal law. So the president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
All right, that was Caroline Leavitt just today at the press conference, the press briefing rather. Let's bring into the conversation Politico reporter Irie Sentner. He joins me. Irie, thanks for being with us here. I know you've been following this extremely closely. Does Caroline Leavitt have a point? If $2.2 billion in federal funding is frozen, Harvard can't use it, they can't get their hands on it. Isn't that just a drop in the bucket for Harvard?
So, yes and no. Harvard has the largest endowment of any university in this country. It's over $50 billion. That said, this is going to affect Harvard's capacity to conduct research, cutting-edge research, essentially immediately. I should also mention that the reason that the Harvard president said no to the Trump administration is likely because its endowment is so large, and other schools, even other Ivy League schools, simply can't afford to do the same.
So we're just looking at some file footage here. So the assertion that maybe Harvard can absorb this, is that accurate to make?
I would say that the Harvard president likely made the decision to deny the Trump administration's demands because they thought that they could absorb it in the short term.
Okay. You know, Irie, can you kind of compare and contrast how Columbia University responded to, very similar demands from the Trump administration and how Harvard is going about it here?
Right. So last month, Columbia was given a very similar letter to the letter that the administration sent Harvard, and Columbia announced that it would capitulate to every single one of those demands. And the reason it did so, based on my conversations with people at the university, is because there was this understanding that the university could not function as usual, and that so much research would stop if the university could not unfreeze the $400 million in funds that the Trump administration had frozen to Columbia.
So we're taking a look at Columbia University's campus. This is from last spring. I was on the desk. I was covering these protests almost each and every day here. In the wake of that kind of battle with Trump and Columbia, the acting president stepped down and resigned, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Yeah, so you're seeing some of the kind of impacts there as well. We also heard from President Trump on Truth Social today, Irie, threatening to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status. What's the likelihood that the administration would ever strongly consider that or actually carry that out? Do you think that's going to happen? Is that on the table? Seriously?
Listen, we have seen the Trump administration go incredibly hard toward these schools. I should say that even after Columbia capitulated to those 9 demands, the Trump administration still has not unfrozen the funding. And so the stop work orders continue to go out. That research continues to not happen. We saw hours after the Harvard president announced that he would not comply with the demands, they almost immediately pulled over $2 billion in funding. And so, I think the Trump administration has demonstrated that it's willing to go incredibly far. I will say, based on the conversations that I'm having with officials in the Trump administration, they're not concerned that Harvard and Columbia and other top universities in this country aren't going to be able to conduct the research that they've been conducting. They say that those schools have already lost their credibility, and they think it's more important that the universities take further action to address what they say is anti-Semitic behavior on their campuses.
So, Irie, President Gerber at Harvard came out and essentially said, we're going to deal with this internally, though.
What are they, a baby?
Harvard administrators, can they be trusted? Can they convince their faculty, their students, their alumni, that they're going to, take what the Trump administration is saying seriously to kind of clean their house inside? Are they going to take up those efforts? Gerber said he is, but can we trust that?
That's a question that you might ask the president of Harvard. Okay. I will say that schools across the board have taken action to reduce the anti-Semitism that we did see over the past few years. And the Harvard president claims that he will do that, but that remains to be seen.
So my colleague Peter Ducey today in the briefing asked, why do private universities, Ivy League universities, get any federal funding? Is that the right question to ask?
Well, Peter is sitting there in the front row. Yeah. It's a good question. I think it's important to understand that when you look at a giant university like Harvard with the giant endowment, much of those funds are restricted. So they're earmarked based, from donors for very specific things. And sometimes that doesn't align with the research that needs to happen, that receives federal funding from the federal government because the federal government believes that it is in the public's interest to conduct that research.
So just lastly for you, where does this go from here? Do other Ivy League institutions kind of need to be, girding themselves for this similar fight? Where does your reporting take you next?
We have seen the Trump administration launched investigations into dozens of colleges, threatened to
unban before Destiny. Listen, our ban's coming, I'm sure. Don't worry.
To freeze funding, or in fact, freeze funding for several of the top universities in this country. And so far, they have capitulated. We've seen many colleges make moves to comply with the Trump administration's demands. We've seen moves to get closer to the administration. For example, Dartmouth College recently hired as its top lawyer the former top lawyer at the RNC. That certainly doesn't hurt. But I think that we will see the Trump administration continue to pummel these universities, particularly those that don't go along with its demands.
No, and I think for this story, it's worth kind of highlighting, or at least enumerating. You say capitulated some of the demands that the Trump administration, is making of these universities. Here were some they were making of Harvard. Here you see there to eliminate DEI programs, report foreign students on visas who violate codes of conduct, and return to merit-based hiring and admissions. Are those similar demands kind of across the board, or particular to Harvard?
Those demands are similar across the board. I think it's on a case-by-case basis, but really the Trump administration and Republicans in general, they see universities, specifically universities in the Ivy League, as places where liberalism and progressivism thrive, and where people go to learn how to be Democrats, essentially. And so, I think it's pretty clear that a lot of the culture war issues that the administration is broadly fighting, they believe that those start at these universities, and we see that in those demands for change.
All right, Irie Sentner there with Politico. Irie, thanks so much for coming on tonight. We'll talk soon.
Later. Let me see. When do I join this? Sounds good. They're going to join at 1:30.
We start with America's oldest college doing something multiple law firms, businesses, and top universities in this country have not. Stand up to President Trump. And today, Harvard is paying the price, literally. The White House says it's freezing more than $2 billion in grants to the university after it rejected the administration's demands for sweeping changes. Moments ago, the president even went further. He threatened the university's tax-exempt status unless it acts, quote, in the...
This guy always stole your talking point. 2 days old.
I think probably a month ago, that there's a new syndrome, which is TDS-DS, which is Trump derangement syndrome.
Fuck you.
Public interest. But is it really the public interest, or does it go well beyond that to what President Trump's political interests are? That is clearly what Harvard thinks. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is at the White House. So, Jeff, here's the bottom line.
Oh, true. What does Ben Shapiro say about this? Does he defend this? Ben Shapiro, Trump, Harvard. Is Harvard really the oldest school in the entire United States? It was the first one, the first college?
Well, folks, tons happening in the news. The Trump administration going after Harvard. Nayib Bukele from El Salvador stops by the Oval Office, and the latest in the trade war. Becoming a member of Daily Wire Plus isn't just a subscription, it's a statement, and you need to be here with us because, I mean, let's be real about this, the news is breaking
predates
all the
America
time.
as a
When you join
country.
Daily Wire Plus, you're joining millions of Americans who share your values, respect our history, and are committed to building a stronger future. Members get ad-free, uncensored access to our daily shows from the most trusted names in media, in-depth investigative journalism, and entertainment that actually reflects the things you believe. Movies, documentaries, series reshaping the culture in real time. Join right now. Head on over to dailywire.com/subscribe. Alrighty, so the big story over the course of the last couple of days that the United States government has now frozen billions of dollars in funding to Harvard. The reason for this is because Harvard refuses to go along with the federal government's demands that it abide by the Civil Rights Act of 1965. The Civil Rights Act dictates that universities and any business that actually receives federal funding must abide by anti-discrimination law. Now, you cannot like some aspects of the Civil Rights Act. Its attempts to intrude into the private sphere, for example. But
no way, he's taking the he's playing the Jew card on this? Really?
the Civil Rights Act is in fact the Civil Rights Act. And the fact is that if a university had facilitated anti-black racism to the extent that Harvard University has facilitated anti-Semitism, there's no question that removal of its federal funding would be on the table. Now, we can also be real about the politics of the situation, which is that federal funding should not be going to these universities anyway.
Oh,
so
my
how much
God.
money does Harvard actually get from the federal government? I asked our sponsors over at Perplexity exactly how much money does Harvard University receive on an annualized basis from the federal government. They said Harvard University receives substantial funding from the federal government each year, primarily to support its research activities. In fiscal year 2024, Harvard received approximately $686 million from federal agency. This amount constituted about 68% of the university's total sponsored research revenue and accounted for roughly 11% of its overall operating revenue, which is a lot of money. I mean, that's a lot of money that they are receiving. Most of it goes to various science outlets like Harvard Medical School or the School of Public Health, but it also does go to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. The Department of Health and Human Services is the largest federal funding. They provide $520 million in fiscal year 2024. Now, again, this is a lever. It's not as though all of this money is going into the pockets of the English professors at Harvard, but money is also fungible. So money that would have been spent on the medical facility is now being spent instead on the English faculty, and this is sort of the point the Trump administration is making. There's no reason at all that your federal taxpayer dollars should be going to Harvard University, which has a massive endowment. Billions and billions of dollars in its endowment. $53 billion at last count. There's no reason your taxpayer dollars should be going to fund Harvard in the first place. And maybe that's the overall fight that we actually should be having. But that's a fight that has to be had in Congress as opposed to inside the executive branch. The executive branch is now making the claim that Harvard University should have its funding removed because it is in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1965. Harvard, for its part, says it is now going to resist the Trump administration's demands to change its governance structure over campus anti-Semitism concerns. And so the government then responded by announcing a $2.26 billion freeze of Harvard's multi-year grants and contracts. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Harvard President Alan Garber put out a statement complaining about the federal government and suggesting the federal government was wrong for involving itself in this way. How dare the federal government actually attach strings to the things it has always attached strings to? Harvard President Alan Garber said the
political strings, though, different.
University will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. The Trump administration said the school's response, quote, reinforces the troubling entitlement mindset that is endemic in our nation's most prestigious universities and colleges, that federal investment does not come with a responsibility to uphold civil rights laws. What exactly are the demands? Well, they asked for 9 actions. Most of the demands concerned how the university...
Why does every moron keep acting as if a $50 billion endowment means Harvard has $50 billion to spend? Does nobody understand finance at all? An endowment is how much money the federal government takes from exclusively blue-collar workers and then gives to wealthy DEI perpetuating institutions every single year. An endowment, I'm pretty sure, is just a giant fund that's used. And I think the goal of an endowment is to be self-perpetuating. So, for instance, if I were to have a $10 million endowment, then ideally, with good conservative investment principles, I could maybe take from that $10 million endowment, let's assume a 7% rate of return of $70,000. And then let's assume that I want to, hedge against like bad markets and everything. So maybe I can take like $30,000 to $40,000 a year, maybe, I guess, out of that. I don't know if the math. I don't know what the investment is looking, but the goal of a $10 million endowment might be to give me a steady $30,000 to $40,000 a year of money to work with, and that endowment continues to be invested and then provides those returns so that it's a safe source of funding. It doesn't mean that you're not supposed to spend your endowment, I don't think. It's supposed to be self-perpetuating, I believe.
University operates. The government was asking for a comprehensive mask ban, as well as changes to governance, leadership, and admissions, and an end to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI programs. So DEI programs are in violation of the Civil Rights Act. There's no question that DEI, which is predicated on the false notion that inequality of outcome by group must be due to discrimination and therefore must be rectified by reverse discrimination, that is in violation of the Civil Rights Act. It's certainly in violation of Supreme Court standards with regard to affirmative action. As far as things like a comprehensive mask ban, the idea there is that you don't want people who have shown up to campus on student visas participating in anti-American activity that would otherwise get them deported, and the university is facilitating all of that. The government is also demanding necessary changes be made to address bias, improve viewpoint diversity, and end ideological capture, fueling anti-Semitic harassment, according to the task force's letter.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking $1 million. For $10 million, it would be $700K. So maybe on a $10 million endowment, maybe you're spending $300 to $500K a year, so that you're not drawing down from the principal. Sorry.
The university said Harvard has made and will continue to make lasting and robust structural policy and programmatic changes to ensure the university is a welcoming and supportive learning environment. But the task force is making demands, quote, in contravention of the First Amendment, and say that they are ignoring due process. Now, again,
what did Harvard do that was anti-Semitic? At our prestigious colleges, every single student should have a pro-Israel point of view. And if you protest on behalf of the Palestinians, or if you protest on behalf of Hamas, you are anti-Semitism and you will be eradicated.
This will all get played out in the courts, presumably. But the idea that Harvard University is somehow owed federal money is absurd. It's absurd on its face. There's no reason that the Trump administration should not be able to attach strings to money that it is sending out the door to a university with a $53 billion endowment. You know, it's an easy way for Harvard to continue its policy of independence from the federal government, to be independent of the federal government. It turns out it's an excellent way. Don't get in bed with the government if you don't want to get screwed. It tends to be a pretty good way of approaching life. The faculty put out a statement on Friday saying, quote, that the federal government's actions overtly seek to impose on Harvard University political views and policy preferences advanced by the Trump administration and commit the university to punishing disfavored speech. Well, no, actually, they're just saying that if you engage in anti-Semitism, then that is in violation of the Civil Rights Act. It's funny.
So to be clear, it sounds like Columbia did capitulate completely to the Trump admin demands, but nothing happened. They didn't get any reprieve from having their shit stripped, so.
To watch all these universities that for years were willing to expel students for saying that boys were not girls, that went after Harvard University. I was there when they went after Lawrence Summers, who was, at the time was the president of Harvard University. They got angry at him because he made the mere suggestion that perhaps the lack of women in scientific institutions might be due to the fact that women are less interested in scientific pursuits overall as opposed to men, and also that the ends of the bell curve with regard to scientific performance on tests tend to be heavily male. He was ousted from his position for that. So don't give me your free speech concerns when you guys have been cracking down on free speech yourselves for a long time. At the very least, if you want to say,
at least he admits he's cracking down on free speech, I guess.
All right, you have to be a private university. You can't have it both ways. You can't say free speech applies to us. We are a free speech institution. Also, we want your taxpayer money. That's not the way that it works. At least it shouldn't work.
Oh, so if taxpayer money is involved, there's no freedom of speech? So every single, state university, every single, wouldn't it be you'd think it would be the exact opposite, wouldn't you? You'd think that when taxpayer funds are involved, that would be the most important parts of freedom of speech, you would think. But not in Benny's world. I guess it's the exact opposite of where your intuitions may take you. That's good to know.
That way. Harvard professor Nicholas Bowie says, this is authoritarian. No, what seems authoritarian to me is you seizing my taxpayer money, shoving it in your giant endowment, and then cramming down a bunch of left-wing agitprop on your tens of thousands of students.
What the president of the United States is demanding of universities is nothing short of authoritarian. There's a quote on the building of the Department of Justice where law ends, tyranny begins. And tyranny, frankly, is the only word to describe what the Trump administration is doing with respect to universities.
I'm confused. How is it tyranny to say you don't get federal dollars if you violate the Civil Rights Act? The Trump Task Force on Anti-Semitism has been investigating Harvard among other universities because, again, during the gigantic anti-Semitic protests that erupted.
By the way, for this fascist Nazi fuck, when you say shit like this and you don't even think about how weird it sounds, the Trump Task Force. Why the fuck is there a Trump Task Force? We've got a massive federal government. We had a Department of Education. Okay, we've got Congress. We got all these. Why do we need a special Trump Task Force to do everything? Well, why can't he use the fucking government? He's the president of the United States, and he's a majority in the Senate and the House. Do something with the actual Congress. Do something with your government. It's so weird how he says the Trump Task Force. The Trump Stoppos came to the school, and the Trump Task Force did this thing with the Trump special appointed employee, with Trump's special appointed Elon Musk, with the special Trump Task Force Doge, with this bro, hello?
The Trump Task Force on Anti-Semitism has been investigating Harvard among other universities because, again,
do we really need a fucking task force on anti-Semitism? Seriously?
Anti-Semitic protests that erupted last year after October 7th. And many of them were, in fact, openly anti-Semitic. We're not just talking anti-Israel. We're talking about full-scale screening for Jews walking through.
Sure. You know what? Who cares? You have a right to be anti-Semitic. It's the United States of America. Hello, freedom of speech. If you want to be anti-Semitic, God bless. That's your right to do so. What are you talking about? If somebody at the school was anti-Semitic, or if the school itself was promoting anti-Semitism, then fine, investigate them for it, fine them for it, or take away their numbers if you want. But it can't just be a epic Trump task force that gets onto Doge ran Twitter and decides, oh, well, we don't like this school, so they lose all their money.
From courtyards. Shabbos Kesselbaum is a student at Harvard University. He sued the university. His case is currently in court right now, based on all of this sort of stuff. And he has many stories to tell about what happened at Harvard University while he was there. The idea that Harvard did not violate the Civil Rights Act is ridiculous. Now, does that mean that every demand that the Trump administration is making is going to get upheld in court? No, I'm sure that some of those demands will be held to be extraneous to the Civil Rights Act complaint the Trump administration is voicing on Harvard. However, Harvard does not have any moral grounds to stand on when they insist that everyone else pay the bills at an incredibly rich university so that they can continue pushing whatever nonsense it is they are pushing. Well, the Trump administration is looking for places to cut fat. Well, you should be cutting fat from, your cell phone company. Pure Talk is preemptively. Find PlanPureTalk.com/Shapiro. Also, there are a lot of problems that you have in your life that you can't take care of preemptively, just things that arrive on you that you can't see coming. Well, one of the things that actually you can see coming a long way off is something that will happen to us all. That, of course, is death. And that means you need to secure your family's future against that with policy. Families.com, who's the head of El Salvador, stopped by the Oval Office with President Trump, and they were talking about a very controversial case surrounding a man named Kilmer Armando Abrego Garcia. That person is a Salvadoran national who lived illegally in the United States. And he was adjudicated as credibly accused, not just of being an illegal immigrant, but of being a member of MS-13 by a variety of courts. That doesn't mean they found that he was, in fact, a member of MS-13, they were saying that there was credible evidence that suggested that he might be a member of MS-13, and the executive branch has the ability to deport him. That was found several years ago. Then there was a withholding order that was put on him because he made a claim that if he were deported specifically to El Salvador, that he would be killed. Well, the Trump administration then deported him. In court, they claimed in their filing.
What the fuck is Shabos? Is that like is that a Jewish media thing? They said that they have to push this thing to tomorrow because apparently the man for Shabos keeps getting delayed on his camera ship. We were supposed to do this 30 minutes ago. Well, I guess we're not doing it. Have I done Akio? No, but I'm like refactoring all my shit before I do that, so. God, I hate this administration. But not as much as I hate conservatives. What the fuck am I even doing with this ship anymore? I forgot I have the second ship. I don't even use it. I don't know what I'm doing. What do you think of Gleba so far? Gleba was annoying initially, but after you understand it, I think it's fine. It's just, you just have to get used to this like kind of horizontal building, and you just have to get used to venting all of this shit off of every, like venting your spoilage. And then I feel like once you have that understanding, then I think it's pretty easy. So I don't know what everybody's Gleba shit ends up looking like, but I have like this huge ring of nutrients and a huge ring of spoilage running at all my edges, and it seems to work fine. Okay, I'm going to set this up to start shipping a whole bunch of stuff to a ship, and then we're going to read this Boasberg. Can somebody link me the Boasberg thing? Link me the actual court doc? Oof, we got a big yikester today. It's interesting, your Gleba setup ended up so much different from mine in my opinion. It's the most different planet from basic vector, but it's quite flexible. Court listener, thank you. Are you going to continue the programming lessons? I'm a vibe coder, so I don't actually need to take any lessons. What is a vibe coder that everybody complains about? Is it just somebody who uses AI? It's like a meme term, I'm guessing, right? Wait, did I actually ship all my explosives out? Good one. AI for everything? Based. If Trump ignores everything the court says and keeps strolling, what are the consequences? Whoa, well... Small spoiler. I've just read a few sentences of random shit. That very question just might be addressed in Boasberg's epic ramble. Or should I say, lay epic. I'm so sorry. Okay, my bad. Okay. You are here. We're going to add to this calcite 5,000 of them. Oh shit, Powell speaking. Sorry, we'll listen to Powell and then we'll do Boasberg after.
And quiet during the program so that we all can gain the full benefit of Chair Powell's remarks. And now it's my pleasure to welcome my friend Austin Goolsbee, the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, a renowned economist and our fellow ECC member. Austin, take it away.
Woo! When are you going to start focusing on quality parts, it's going to be better? I'm probably going to do that as well. Because I just got epic things. How do you deal with science pack spoiling? I've just been manually flying and researching shit that I need to use. I imagine the best way to deal with this is probably just have faster ships, but I'll figure that out later. When does Destiny realize that this is a direct result of what the Dems did? True. Every single bad thing that happens is because of the Democrats. Yes. King.
Which goes to the greatest financial researcher under age 40. He's since over age 40, but he was the inaugural winner. He is a member of the group of 30, and he was the 23rd governor of the Reserve Bank of India. And before that,
actually, I can be
chief
working on that.
economist and director of research at the International Monetary Fund. You probably know him as a regular contributor to the Financial Times. He speaks extensively on economic and financial issues. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Rajan.
That's not what I wanted.
And then our featured speaker will be Jerome Powell, the 16th chair of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System.
Hell yes.
As head of the U.S. Central Bank, as you know, Chair Powell plays a crucial role in the country's monetary policy, oversees major financial institutions, and maintains economic and financial stability in this country. He was first appointed as a board member of the Fed by President Obama in 2012. He was subsequently elevated to chair of the Fed by President Trump in 2018, and then renominated to his post by President Biden in 2021. He has the respect of members of both parties.
Wait.
And I believe that no one as Fed chair
has literally
ever
live.
had to deal with more and varied challenging issues than Chair Powell has had to deal with. From the pandemic to fighting inflation, to bank runs, and on, his leadership at the Fed has been a steady hand and one of the all-time greats.
No, I went to the wrong.
Before coming to the Fed, Chair Powell was a visiting scholar at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C. He first entered public service at the Treasury Department under President George H.W. Bush, with responsibility for financial institutions, the Treasury debt market, related areas. Outside of public service, Chair Powell has worked as a lawyer, an investment banker, and been a partner at the Carlyle Group. In addition to his service on corporate boards, he served on boards of charitable and educational institutions, including the Bendham Center.
New York Times reported like 8 minutes ago that a judge might make a... Oh, stop! Don't talk about that!
Finance
Don't donate! We'll go over it soon. We're going to read that whole court order. We're going to read the whole thing.
And the Nature Conservancy.
Because it's probably one of the most important things
and
happening right now, even though nobody
He
cares
is
about
a
it.
D.C. native, received a BA in politics from Princeton, and a law degree from Georgetown University, where he was editor of the Georgetown Law Journal.
LeMayo.
Please welcome to the Economic Club of Chicago again, Chair Jerome Powell.
Woo! This is a rerun. He already spoke. Is that true?
Thank you and good afternoon. It's great to be back in Chicago.
Does this guy not age?
Thanks for that kind introduction.
How old is this guy? The fuck?
Austin. So I'm looking forward to our conversation, my conversation.
72? He doesn't look a day over 65.
Professor Rajan Raghu. But first, I'll briefly discuss the outlook for the economy and monetary policy. So, at the
It's
Fed,
grim.
we are
No, just
always
kidding.
focused on the dual mandate goals that Congress has given us: maximum employment and stable prices. Despite heightened uncertainty and downside risks, the U.S. economy is still in a solid position.
Okay.
The labor market is at or near maximum employment.
Okay.
Inflation has come down a great deal, but is still running a bit above our 2% objective. Turning briefly to the incoming data, we'll get the initial reading on first quarter GDP in a couple of weeks. The data we have in hand so far suggests that growth has slowed in the first quarter of this year from last year's solid pace.
Oof, that's okay.
Despite strong motor vehicle sales, overall consumer spending appears to have grown modestly. In addition, strong imports during the first quarter.
Why is he not calling Trump out? Federal Reserve Chair. He's supposed to be apolitical. Nothing in this speech should be explicitly political. That is his job. That'd be a very, very, very scary line to cross. Let me grab Red Bull real quick. Hold on.
reflecting attempts by businesses to get ahead of potential tariffs are expected to weigh on GDP growth. Surveys of households and businesses report a sharp decline in sentiment and elevated uncertainty about the outlook, largely reflecting trade policy concerns. Outside forecasts for the full year are coming down, and for the most part point to continued slowing, but still positive.
Are we expecting an interest rate cut? Well, I guess this is my test of the little bit of macro econ, anything I know. My bet would be heavily against any whoops. Don't bet against them. No, just kidding. My bet would be heavily against any type of cut because inflation is still a little bit hot and unemployment is still pretty low. So if they were to cut interest rates right now, it would be exclusively to help the United States economically, which is not part of the Fed's dual mandate, which is to keep inflation low and unemployment low, right? And if inflation is high, you're supposed to increase interest rates or keep them high. And if unemployment is low, then you should also keep interest rates high. So everything is pointing towards them keeping rates high, from what I understand. But who knows? Maybe I'm a fucking retard.
Positive growth. We are closely tracking incoming data as households and businesses continue to digest these developments. In the labor market, during the first 3 months of this year, non-farm payrolls grew by an average of 150,000 jobs per month. While job growth has slowed relative to last year, the combination of low layoffs and lower labor force growth has kept the unemployment rate in a low and stable range. Meanwhile, the ratio of job openings to unemployed job seekers has remained just above 1, near its pre-pandemic level. Wage growth has continued to moderate while still outpacing inflation. Overall, the labor market appears to be in solid condition and broadly in balance, and is not a significant source of inflationary pressure. As for our price stability mandate, inflation has significantly eased from its pandemic highs of mid-2022 without the kind of painful rise in unemployment that has frequently accompanied efforts to bring down high inflation. Progress on inflation continues at a gradual pace, and recent readings remain above our 2% objective. Estimates based on the most recent data from last week show that total headline PCE prices rose 2.3% over the 12 months ending in March, and that excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core prices rose 2.6%. Looking forward, the new administration is in the process of implementing substantial policy changes in 4 distinct areas. Trade.
Wait, where are my quality? There's no way I can search through all my chests on every planet or whatever, right? I don't know where my quality modules are.
Migration, fiscal policy, and regulation. These policies are still evolving, and their effects on the economy remain highly uncertain. As we learn more, we will continue to update our assessment. The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects.
Well, this has to be in a
higher
logistics
inflation
network.
and slower growth. Both survey and market-based measures of near-term inflation expectations have moved up significantly, with survey participants pointing to tariffs. Survey measures of longer-term inflation expectations, for the most part, appear to remain well anchored as well. Market-based break-evens continue to run close to 2%. So, as we gain a better understanding of the policy changes, we'll have a better sense of the implications for the economy, and hence for monetary policy. Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation. The inflationary effects could also be more persistent. Avoiding that outcome will depend on the size of the effects, on how long it takes for them to pass through fully to prices, and ultimately on keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored, and to make certain that a one-time increase in price level does not become an ongoing inflation problem. As we act to meet that obligation, we will balance our maximum employment and price stability mandates, keeping in mind that without price stability, we cannot achieve the long periods of strong labor market conditions that benefit all Americans.
Oof. When he says things like this, like we have to maintain price stability and all this, it makes it sound like he's explicitly saying, don't rely on interest rates to save you, where our goal is price stability, and we need price stability. All of us should want that. He's making it sound like explicitly don't rely on any type of thing like that. Wait, how is stuff getting stacked? Who's stacking this ore? I don't think I had any bulk inserters down here.
We may find ourselves in the challenging scenario in which our dual mandate goals are in tension. If that were to occur, we would consider how far the economy is from each goal and the potentially different time horizons over which those respective gaps would be anticipated to close.
Oh, miners can.
As that great Chicagoan Ferris Bueller once noted, life moves pretty fast. For the time being, we are well positioned to wait for greater clarity before considering any adjustments to our policy stance.
Nice.
We continue to analyze the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We understand that elevated levels of unemployment or inflation can be damaging and painful for communities, families, and businesses. We will continue to do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability.
Ooh, everything we can. He's saying, fuck you, Trump. We're not doing shit to help your bullshit economic policy. That's what he's saying. Maybe. Man, if I'm wrong, it's going to look so bad. Good luck.
Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Clapper.
Thank you very much, Chair Powell, for those remarks. I look forward to your elaborating on them in the course of the next 40 minutes or so.
Thank you.
I understand last time you were here, Melody Hobson interviewed you. Well, I'm a poor substitute, but I'll try and compensate in the quality of the questions. As you repeatedly emphasize, communication and transparency are very important for the Fed. I would like to get more from you on some of what you just said. As a former central banker, the only sort of caution I've been given by the Economic Club is to not lapse into central bank speak. So I'll try my best not to do that. Let me start by saying you've guided the Fed through some really difficult events, including the pandemic, the dash for cash in March 2020, the great inflation, the banking crisis centered around Silicon Valley Bank. And then over the course of the last year, we've seen a growing possibility of a Fed-engineered soft landing.
Ooh.
And now it seems like everything has changed. In the course of a couple of months, JP Morgan has shifted.
Oh, no, wait, that's good. A Fed-engineered soft landing, as in the Federal Reserve's policy was good, and people were worried that there was going to be a massive kind of recession, but the soft landing is that we had a little bit of pain, but nowhere near as bad as it could have been, I think, right?
To estimating the probability of a recession this year at around 60%. What do you think about all this?
Well, first of all, thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Actually, the appearance I did here was my very first appearance as chair 7.5 years ago. So it's great to be back. And I would agree with you that it's been an eventful 7 years. Putting it mildly, I keep waiting for the 3 months of calm, that never comes. But to your question, I guess to set the stage, let's look back at 2024. 2024 was a year where the economy grew 2.4%. Unemployment remained in the low fours, close to mainstream estimates of maximum employment, and inflation came down and was running at the end of the year around 2.5%. That's the economy that we had, and I won't decide how to characterize that, but that's where things were. Where we are now, again to your question, is the administration is, as I mentioned in my remarks, is implementing significant policy changes, and particularly trade now is the focus. And the effects of that are likely to move us away from our goals. So unemployment is likely to go up as the economy slows in all likelihood, and inflation is likely to go up as tariffs find their way, and some part of those tariffs come to be paid by the public.
I feel like he's trying to be very, very, very careful. So monetary policy, the reason why it needs to be apolitical is because in democracies, you can't really weather very many storms that are on larger timescales because you pay electoral consequences for it. It's hard for administrations to think long term. Monetary policy, if it goes awry, can't be, correcting for it might be catastrophic. So the temptation would be is that if you ran the government and you were in control of monetary policy, you would probably just always push for low interest rates. I would say that like a low interest rate in an artificial way, it's kind of like a budget deficit, right? Like, oh, we'll just borrow more and maybe they'll pay it back in the future. So if you were able to control the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, you would just run, very low interest rates all the time. But the problem is that in the long term, this would have catastrophic consequences. So the Federal Reserve is supposed to be an apolitical entity that can make those difficult decisions in the long term that a democracy wouldn't be able to. A Democratic elected leader probably wouldn't be able to.
So that's the strong likelihood. And
which is also one of the reasons why you should be upset. No one cares. But when Donald Trump is like threatening the Fed, which he did in his first administration and he continues to do, it's because he wants to have control over the Federal Reserve, because any politician would dream of being able to just set interest rates and everything. That would be amazing for your economy in the short term.
My hope is that we'll get through this and get back. Well, we're always going to be aiming for maximum employment and price stability. That's what we do. I do think we'll be moving away from those goals probably for the balance of this year, and then, or at least not making any progress, and then we'll resume that progress as we can.
Why are lower interest rates bad in the long term? Low interest rates mean that borrowing is very cheap, which means that you have a ton of capital investments that might be pushing a market to run hotter than it should. And when we say a market is running hot, what we mean is there's a ton of money flowing through the economy. People can afford to maybe have lower prices. They're making bigger investments in their companies. People have way more money on hand. It drives up demand for a whole bunch of goods, and people are buying more and they're getting paid more. And you get this runaway economy where like everybody's got so much money. And when you hit a bump in the road, and at some point you need to bring your interest rates back up, maybe because your inflation starts to get out of control. The prices are starting to get too much on everything because everybody's got too much money. Well, as soon as you start to up the prices, you've probably moved away significantly from where your economy should be because of all of the low interest rates, and you're going to have a huge crash where everybody comes back to reality like, wait a second, this economy was running hot for way too long. Maybe 25% returns on the S&P 500 year over year. Maybe that's not sustainable, and that correction where the market kind of resets to where it probably should have been with a saner monetary policy is going to be a depression, or it'll be just a brutal recession.
Let's talk a little more about tariffs. I mean, you recognize that some of the effects of the tariffs will be one-off, transitory, but you also have said that perhaps they will give room for a number of firms to raise prices. You mentioned dryers. When washing machine prices went up because of tariffs, dryer prices also went up in tandem, even though they weren't tariffed. What's your sense about the effect?
What is Jerome Powell's position in relation to the rest of the government? Is he different than like a secretary? Yes. Your chair of the Federal Reserve is not a political entity that changes with the rest of your cabinet, which will change every single time there's a new administration. The Federal Reserve chair, once he's appointed, I don't think he serves life terms. Are they 10-year terms? No, they're not. Federal Reserve, term length is 4 years and renewable as chair, 14 years non-renewable as governor. Okay, so for the chair, it's 4 years, but they're renewed. I'm trying to think, does the chair get confirmed by the Senate? I think they do. Okay, they do, yeah, all right. It's not supposed to be like a political position though, where you put in a Fed Reserve chair that is like a guy who's cool to you. Oh shit, I didn't realize how much the Fed chair relied on norms. Oh God, wait. Oh Jesus. When is the next? (2022). So 2026, the Fed chair would be up for. If Donald Trump were to try to install some political loyalists there, that might be like the tipping point, the end that we don't come back from, but I don't know. Who knows?
Of tariffs on inflation, what would make them more persistent, and what would make them have effects on growth?
So in a kind of a simple starting point is one tariff comes in that gets passed along in prices and raises inflation, but it's just a one-time thing. So the price level goes up, and that's it. But that can happen in some circumstances, but it depends on a number of things which we don't know yet. And I would point to a couple of them, or three of them actually. One is just the size of the effects, and as I mentioned, the tariffs are larger than forecasters had expected, certainly larger than we expected, even in the upside case. We looked at a range of cases, so that's one. The second one is how long does it take for the tariffs to have their effects on inflation? To the extent it takes longer and longer, that raises the risks that the public will begin to experience higher inflation, they'll come to expect it, and companies will come to expect it. So
one of the hard things too about monetary policy, I believe, is I don't fully understand. Metalloid will explain it to us someday. Even I don't fully understand how the Fed influences rates exactly per se, but I do know that there can be a bit of a lag time on them doing rates. So if the Fed thinks that we're going to experience high inflation or thinks that we're going to experience high unemployment, they try to take these moves a bit preemptively to try to guess where the market's going to be. So sometimes the effects are lagging. So their ability to head off certain problems means that they have to act first, or they might miss something or whatever.
that risks higher inflation. And the third is just what I mentioned in my speech, which is my remarks, which is got to keep inflation expectations well anchored. So if we have those three things under control, that's what it will take. And indeed, our role is to make sure that this will be a one-time increase in prices and not something that turns into an.
He's having a rough time. His Lolly Queen just went into retirement. Why did they call it? Wait, so what is Hollow Live? Is it? It's not an actual school, right? I'm retarded. I know it's not an actual school. It's like the name of the company for the VTubers. Are they actually high school girls? When they talk about like, oh, she's graduate, are they actually high schoolers or? Okay.
Ongoing inflation process. That's a big part of our job.
What about the effects of tariffs on quantities? With the level of tariffs that, for example, have been currently applied on China, there's a fear that the supply chain may get disrupted, that firms may not be able to import their relevant stuff from China given the level of prices. If it turns into a supply shock, would the Fed's response be different than if it was primarily something which affected just prices?
So I actually had dinner at the Chicago Fed last night and with a number of directors of various parts of the Chicago Fed, and many of them are CEOs of significant companies, and they this uncertainty that they're feeling and the issue with imported components to their products is just a huge issue. But with if you look back at the pandemic, if you remember, there was a shortage of semiconductors, and that led to a shortage of cars at a time of extremely high car demand. And it was a prolonged shortage because production couldn't keep up. And that led to an extended period, one of the things that led to an extended period of inflation. So when you think about supply disruptions, that is the kind of thing that can take time to resolve, and it can lead what would have been a one-time inflation shock to be extended, perhaps more persistent, and we would worry about that. In this case, you can look at the car companies, which their supply chains are likely seem to be on track to be disrupted significantly, and you would worry that process will take some years and that the inflationary process might be extended. So these are all of this is highly uncertain. We're thinking now really before the tariffs have their effects as how they might affect the economy, and that's why we're waiting really to see what the policies ultimately are, and then we can make a better assessment of what the economic
no idea what the fuck the president's going to do, in other words.
Let's move to immigration. You talked about the labor markets being in reasonable equilibrium right now. Of course, what we've seen over the last few months, months of the previous administration continuing into this administration, is immigration has fallen off considerably. What's your sense on how that will affect the labor market?
So part of why growth was so strong in the last couple of years was just very high levels of immigration, and those people went to work. The economy hired them. There was a lot of demand. We were still working off the labor shortage. What's happened since the prior administration changed their policy?
There's this world, guys. There is this world where this ends up being like a good thing for the United States, because we finally learn, like, oh shit, all these things that they told us about like immigration was actually a total fucking lie. It actually really did help the economy. These laborers actually really were important for a variety of reasons. Like, oh shit, maybe it is actually good to have other people coming to our country, to work and to learn and do all this. Maybe this actually helped. There's like a world where we finally learn that, maybe, hopefully.
As you mentioned,
maybe
immigration has fallen very sharply, and therefore the growth of workers has really stopped. It's really stagnant. But at the same time, demand has also fallen. And so demand for workers, so payroll job creation has also fallen. And they've kind of fallen in tandem, which is why the unemployment rate has been pretty stable for about a year. So in a way, demand and coincidentally, perhaps to some extent, demand and supply for workers has fallen. In terms of the effect on the labor market, right now we're still at full employment, and labor force participation is still strong. Wages have moved back down to levels that are now pretty sustainable, given an assumption about productivity. So the labor market's in a really good place. Longer term, the effects of immigration are not thought to matter much for inflation. The effects on demand and supply will more or less cancel each other out. So we wouldn't expect there to be a big impact on inflation.
You've seen in recent weeks substantial talk about layoffs in government, as well as freezes in research establishments and universities in jobs. How soon and how big will this be in its impact on labor markets?
So it's too soon to say, but what I can say is, of course, the people being laid off in government, this is highly significant to them. We don't know how big that's going to be. Right now, it's not big enough to affect a workforce of 170 million people materially. In terms of the cutbacks in funding and for science and things like that, we do see in areas, particularly in cities that have a lot of universities and research hospitals and research institutions, we're really hearing significant layoffs and significant impacts on employment. I don't know how much that will total up to. And of course, in addition, cutting back on scientific research may have implications for economic growth, for productivity, for health, for all kinds of things. But those are very difficult to estimate in real time.
Now, given that we're talking about the future, you may be confronted in the not so distant future with both higher levels of unemployment as well as potentially higher inflation.
High unemployment and high inflation at the same time are very, very, very scary. Really low unemployment and low unemployment and high inflation are easy to deal with because you can just raise rates, right? So the idea is that, okay, hold on. So independently looking at the mandate, okay, the dual mandate. The mandate is to keep unemployment at around 5%, probably, and to keep inflation at around 2%, probably, right? This is the dual mandate of the Federal Reserve. If unemployment goes up, high unemployment means you want to drop interest rates to get more money flowing through the economy. If unemployment gets too low, then you want to raise interest rates in order to slow down the economy, right? When inflation gets really high, you want to raise interest rates to slow the economy down. When inflation is below 2%, then you want to lower interest rates to get the economy kind of moving. You want a little bit of inflation. You want to see some healthy spending, consumer confidence, all that. The scary thing, like the hellscape world you run into, is, I think people call this is, I think, what stagflation is, right? Is when you start to run into high unemployment, your unemployment is going past 5%, but you also run into high inflation. And the Federal Reserve's ability to counteract these environments becomes a lot more limited because now you've got competing pressures where high unemployment is calling for a lower interest rate, but high inflation is calling for a higher interest rate. And now the Fed is kind of constrained in terms of the options available to it. I don't know if this was the, maybe this is the, where quantitative easing came from. It's what kind of moved them into that environment. Maybe? I'm not sure. I don't know enough about QE to speak intelligently about it. But
and of course,
what exactly does a stagflation economy look like? Imagine every time you go to the store, instead of going to the store, seeing prices you expect them to be and being able to buy what you want ordinarily, instead you just go to the checkout aisle and somebody fucking you with a massive dragon dildo every single fucking time. Stagflation is where you have a stagnant economy, meaning like people are being laid off, unemployment is getting higher, it's hard to find work, your work isn't paying very well. But you go to the store and the prices are still getting higher. Stuff is even more unaffordable. Prices aren't coming down like you would hope or expect a little bit. So things are becoming more expensive and people have less money to spend. This is like a hellscape world. It's very, very, very bad to have both of these things happening at the same time.
As well as potentially higher inflation. And of course, the policies that each one requires could be different. You talked a little bit at the podium about how the Fed would see these two and how it would address it. Just giving you a chance again to elaborate on that.
Right. So most of the time, when the economy is weak, inflation is low, and unemployment is high, and both of those.
Oh, he's going to explain whatever. That's okay. He's not going to use the dragon dildo analogy like I use, so.
Call for lower interest rates to support activity, and vice versa. So most of the time, the two goals are not in tension, and they're not really in tension now. The labor market is still strong.
Yeah.
But the shock that we're experiencing, the impulses we're feeling, are for higher unemployment and higher inflation. And our tool only does one of those two things at the same time. So it's a difficult place for central banks, to be in terms of what to do. And so we, the best we can do is we actually have a little provision in our consensus statement, which is
actually stagflation. The best way to understand stagflation is the economy that everybody pretends that we've been in for the past 20 years, where everybody says, "Oh my God, I just graduated a comp sci degree and I can't find any work. There's no work and everything is so expensive." So if you go on Twitter or on social media or you look at whatever you've been posting on my fucking chat, okay, that's what stagflation is. It's what people think the economy is, all right?
Thing that we vote on to embody how we approach these questions. What we say is we will look at how far the economy is from each of those two goals, and then we'll ask, might there be different paces at which they would approach those goals? We'll look at those things and think about them, and we'll make what will no doubt be a very difficult judgment. Again, we're not experiencing that now, but we could well be in that situation, as I mentioned in my remarks.
Just want to pick up on a word that is often used today, uncertainty. As a respondent to a Dallas Fed survey said, "I've never felt more uncertainty about my business in my entire 40-plus years career." The worry today is not just about immediate policy uncertainty, but an entire change in the U.S.'s economic philosophy. Not just policy uncertainty, so to speak, but structural uncertainty. One of the effects, as you've pointed out, of high levels of uncertainty is that firms postpone investment. For instance, even after the tariffs stabilize, firms that contemplate reshoring production facilities will hesitate, not knowing if the tariffs will be reversed in the future, maybe by the next administration. How do you take such longer-term uncertainty into account in your policies?
So let me just agree that what comes back very strongly, and everyone will understand this. These are very fundamental changes in long held in some cases policies in the United States, and there's not any real experience. I mean, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were actually not this large, and they were 95 years ago, so there isn't a modern experience of how to think about this. And businesses and households are saying in surveys that they're experiencing incredibly high uncertainty.
He's not supposed to be political in any way, size, shape, or form. And I'll be honest, I haven't listened to prior Jerome Powell speeches, but this is like he's towing the line as much as possible right now. Or no, not towing the line. I shouldn't say that. That's not the right expression. He's what do you call it when you like test the boundaries of something? There's an expression I'm looking for. People used to say I did this at Twitch. Why do you pushing the boundary, walking the line? Oh, walking the line. Maybe walking the line. Where he's not being political and he's not trying to criticize the current administration, but he's saying that all the polling shows that businesses are very scared. We've never operated in an environment like this before. These tariffs are larger than the Smoot-Hawley ones, which I think everybody agrees were pretty bad.
There's a lot of research, some of it from the Fed, showing that does lead to business.
Is Destiny waiting on the SCOTUS Garcia case for more information, or is it something he already talked about and I've missed? I haven't spoken about it yet. I'm going to read the whole court order, though, in a bit. It's not a SCOTUS case anymore, though. Don't call it that. Now it's simply now it's just a federal district case. The SCOTUS has already ruled and has said the government is 100% out of bounds. The SCOTUS has spoken. The Supreme Court has said that the government must comply with the courts now. So I wouldn't even call this a SCOTUS thing anymore. Now it's just whether or not the government wants to follow the law or not, basically.
Businesses and households stepping back from decisions, which of course makes common sense. And you hope that that's something that you go through a phase and then you know what things become more certain, and therefore people can resume normal economic activities given their understanding of what is the new normal. And your question really is, what if the uncertainty remains high? I think that's a difficult environment. I think people's expected rates of return would
have you already heard of Boeing and NVIDIA trading blockades? No, I haven't heard of that. I do know that NVIDIA and AMD got fucked in after hours. Oh, what did the actual... Well, maybe when the markets open, maybe the stock was fine. Woo! Nope. What is... I read this on Wall Street Bets. I don't know how true it is. Any bad news for NVIDIA is bad news for AMD. Good news for NVIDIA is good news for NVIDIA. And then, what was it? Like, bad news for AMD is bad news for AMD. Good news for AMD is good news for AMD. Basically, any news for NVIDIA, I guess, is bad news for AMD. People just don't like the AMD stock in Wall Street Bets. Damn! All right. Vanguard. I wonder if all of my gains on Nvidia and CrowdStrike are gone. Let's check. Space markets. What is this new ad that just popped up? Open a Cash Plus account. What, for people who don't like the markets? BayZ. Absolutely BayZ. Damn! Never mind. My CrowdStrike is still holding strong. I don't know if it makes up for my Nvidia losses, though. I'm up 200k on CrowdStrike, and I'm down 50k on Nvidia. So 150 combined, 75 on each. That's probably beating the markets right now. How is CrowdStrike? What a godly buy. CrowdStrike stock. They're up 10% year to date. God damn. How do they do it? Wait, when can I dump this? I want to sell. I need to be out of this. When did we buy CrowdStrike? Does anybody remember? Cost, basis, summary. Crowd. Date acquired, 7/23/24. Damn. July. Whew, we got 3 months. Good luck.
And therefore...
Somebody said, Destiny, services aren't tariffed. That might be true in a literal sense, but you can absolutely enact policies on your planet. Not on your planet. I'm looking at my list now. Sorry. You can enact policies in your country that would make services more expensive or prohibit certain services. So you can tax services, or you can do things to make services expensive or tariff them effectively. It just wouldn't be called a tariff. It'd be some local law or restriction you would pass.
People can resume normal economic activities given their understanding of what is the new normal. I mean, your question really is, what if the uncertainty remains high? I think that's a difficult environment. I think people's expected rates of return would have to be higher. I think people would that would weigh on, to me, investment just in general. If the United States were to become a jurisdiction where risks are just structurally higher going forward, that would make us less attractive as a jurisdiction. We don't know that at this point, but I think that would be the effect.
Yeah. Well, let me turn to financial markets. We've seen some volatility, especially stock market volatility. I mean, the levels of the VIX are up to the levels they were in the early days of the pandemic, coming off somewhat now. Some people believe the Fed will intervene if the stock market plummets, the so-called Fed put. Are they correct?
Put this to rest, Jerome. I want to hear a big baller, big dick answer from you. We have 2 mandates at the Federal Reserve. Last I checked, none of those mandates had fuck all to do with the stock market. I need you to big dick this answer, J-Dog.
Rick?
Yeah, laugh.
I'm going to say no with an explanation.
Hell yes. Thank you.
So what I think is going on in markets is markets are processing what's going on. And it's really the policies, particularly the trade policy. And really the question is, where's that going to come in? Where's that going to land? And we don't know that yet. And until we know that, you can't really make informed assessments that would still be highly uncertain. Once you know what the policies are, it'll still be highly uncertain what the economic effects will be. So markets are struggling with a lot of uncertainty, and that means volatility. But having said that, markets are functioning. Conditional on being in such a challenging situation, markets are doing what they're supposed to do. They're orderly, and they're functioning just about as you would expect them to function.
So we've seen volatility also in the bond market, and at a time when usually there's a flight to safety, we saw yields on the German Bund and the Japanese government bond come down.
So generally, a flight to safety. When people say a flight to safety, okay, hold on. I really want people to understand this basic shit, but maybe you guys already understand this. Hold on. Let me just pull this out. Should I explain this basic macro econ stuff or just play the video? Okay. Flight to safety means that no matter what's happening in the world, no matter what's going on, we have these things called treasury bonds from the United States Federal Reserve that everybody wants to buy. Everybody loves treasury bonds. What you're basically buying is you're buying U.S. debt, and you are and the Federal Reserve is issuing something saying, hey, if you buy this treasury bond, we're going to pay you back, whatever the interest rates are in USD over some period of time. I think there's, 5, 10, and are there some other treasury bonds that people sell? So even when times are tough, even when times are scary, now this is unique to the United States. This doesn't necessarily apply to any other country because we're just the God country, and everybody loves the USD because the United States is so strong and big and has a big military and big economy. So even in times of uncertainty, the U.S. is generally okay because we have because we can always sell our debt. We can always sell treasury bonds. So markets are uncertain markets are globally uncertain. People still buy treasury bonds. It's a safe place to store your money. Even if the world economy is going down, the USD will still be there at the end of the day, and you'll be okay. It's a way to hedge against uncertainty and volatility in the markets. But this last time, a very unique thing happened where volatility increased in the world. And then there's still a supply demand when it comes to treasury things. So if a lot of people are buying treasuries, the demand for them is increasing quite a bit. Meaning we can pay lower and lower interest rates, right? Like if somebody's like, hey, I'm the only guy in the universe that wants to buy your debt. I'll give you, 5% interest. No, I need more. Okay, 10% interest, right? You got to pay a lot of interest. But if everybody's coming to you, I want to buy USD. Holy shit, I want to buy the US debt. I shouldn't say USD because it's not a Forex market. It's not actually just US currency. But people are like, I want to invest. I want to buy treasury bonds. All these motherfuckers are here. All right. Who wants it for 4%? All right. Oh, me. Okay. What about 3.5%? Right? I'll go lower, right? The problem, though, is I don't know if this is confirmed or not yet, but supposedly Canada or Japan started to sell their treasury bonds on the open market, meaning everybody wasn't coming to the U.S. to buy our debt. And other countries were even selling part of our debt, meaning the U.S. had to pay even higher interest rates to get people to be interested in it. So that flight to safety wasn't actually happening. What was actually happening was people were abandoning the USD in times of market volatility. That should never happen. Ever. Ideally. Ever.
But we saw yields on U.S. treasuries go up.
So when the yield goes up, it sounds like a good thing. The yield goes up. What that means is that our Treasury Department has to pay a higher interest rate for people to buy our debt, which hurts us because our interest payments are higher, right? That should never happen in times of economic volatility. People should always want USD, but they don't right now.
And the Japanese government bond come down. But we saw yields on U.S. treasuries go up. What do you attribute this to?
Also, just as a quick thing, because I see some people telling me this now, and I've heard people say this in the past. People will say things like, "Oh no, Destiny, it's not about you keep saying like Japan is selling our debt or whatever, but that's not true. It's not the government; it's private companies." So, kind of yes and kind of no. It might be private companies, but I don't actually know if that distinction matters here because a private fund or whatever is probably going to act in its best interest in a similar way that a government would anyway. Like, I don't think a government has to tell all of the private companies in Japan. The government doesn't have to say, guys, quick, you need to sell your USD. Those companies will just look at market conditions and go, looks like the USD is kind of fucked. We're going to start selling these treasury bonds on the open markets, right? That would be my understanding. That's conjecture on my part. I don't know 100% that's true, but that would be my guess.
So I would just say the same thing. I think it's very hard to know in real time. I've had a lot of experience with significant moves, for example, in the bond market, where there's a narrative that people land on, and then 2 months later you look back and go, that was completely wrong. So I think
so what Jay Powell is talking here is a lot of people were saying, oh my God, Japan's dumping the treasuries, oh my God, which I think I was saying that. But the reality is we don't actually know until those holdings are reported like a quarter later or months later. We don't know 100% for sure because I don't think that's publicly made available who's selling what, I think.
Very premature to say exactly what's going on. Clearly, there's some delevering going on.
You're a millionaire. Why don't you do what Michael Sheen did? Michael Sheen, I've written off $1 million of debt for 900 people. Because I'm a millionaire in if I spend millions of dollars, I'm going to be a brokenaire. What do you mean? I don't have enough money to just give away $1 million. The fuck?
That was completely wrong. So I think it's...
Wait. Hold on. Donos. Destiny, they found on Google Earth satellite dead bodies and blood in the El Salvador prison. Yeah, that's a bad prison. Everybody knows it's a bad prison. This is a horrible prison. We should all know this. It's not good. Why in the fuck do I have friends saying it is good for the U.S. to invest a bunch of money into Bitcoin? Did something happen, or am I just stupid thinking it weakens you? It's just retarded friends that are too far into software engineering and crypto that think they understand everything about the entire world.
For example, in the bond market, where there's a narrative that people land on, and then 2 months later you look back and go, that was completely wrong. So I think it's very premature to say exactly what's going on. Clearly, there's some delevering going on among hedge funds in levered trades and things like that. It's also, again, it's the markets processing historically unique developments and with great uncertainty. And I think you'll probably see continued volatility. But I wouldn't try to be definitive about exactly what's causing that. I would just say markets are orderly and they're functioning kind of as you would expect them to in this time of high uncertainty.
So the Fed, in its last meeting, slowed the pace of shrinking of its balance sheet. Was this driven by uncertainty about how much?
Just curious, if you're a millionaire, is there ways you can mitigate your taxes heavily? It seems like a lot of people believe that rich people can do a ton of creative things to avoid taxes. There's different peaks, or there's different income levels, I think, where you can do funky things with your taxes. So if you're like a contract worker and you make between, I'd say 50 to 250,000 a year, there's a little loophole that you have with an LLC that does is it 2553? What's the S corp election form? You can elect to be treated as an S corp, and you can basically bypass on half your income or more paying federal income taxes. Now you still pay FICA. No, I'm sorry, it's the opposite. You can avoid paying your self-employment taxes on a big percentage of your income. I would say that's like the small hack if you're earning between anywhere from 50 to 250,000 and you start your own business, which is basically free. You can avoid a bunch of taxes on your FICA there. Right. Yeah. Past 250K, that becomes less and less lucrative. It helps a little bit because Social Security tax is capped out at like 160,000 of income. Past that, you can still have that little S corp trick. You're saving a little bit, but past that, if you're earning ordinary income, there's not really fuck all you can do. Like, there's not much I can do for tax mitigation. I think my effective income is like the taxes I pay is probably like 37%. It's a fuck ton of money. Once you start getting into other things like real estate, there's a lot of tricks that you can do to hedge off your tax footprint. And then maybe once you are ultra wealthy, I don't know how much maybe if you're earning maybe 10 million plus a year in ordinary or capital gains income somehow, or dispersed, whatever, maybe at that point you can start doing like exotic tax avoidance. But at least for me, I don't know, if you're earning ordinary income or capital gains income, it seems like you're just kind of fucked. I don't think there's a lot of clever, creative ways to get rid of your taxes there. The reason why a lot of people, from what I've read at least, the reason why a lot of people seem to think that rich people can avoid a fuck ton of taxes is because people are looking at the increase in wealth that a person has and then saying that person's not paying any taxes on their increase in wealth, but it's because they haven't sold anything. There's no realized gain there. So that was that ProPublica article that tried to say like billionaires only pay 2% taxes. Like, well, no, none of those gains are realized yet. So, but
meeting slowed the pace of shrinking of its balance sheet. Was this driven by uncertainty about how much reserves and liquidity the market needed, and you wanted to take a little more time to find that out? And flip side, you said the market was orderly. What if market disruptions emerge? Would the Fed intervene?
So we think that reserves are still abundant. So we don't think we're close to the point, particularly close to the point where we would stop. But we were facing a situation in which, for other reasons, there were going to be big flows into and out of reserves, as it had to do with the debt ceiling and the Treasury General Account. For those of you who are Treasury market people, that'll make sense. But while those big flows are happening for over a period of 6 months, we would actually be shielded from being able to see evidence that we were or were not getting close to the level of less abundant reserves. And so we decided.
Your donos and shit are tips, so no tax on tips hides a bunch of your income from tax burden, if I recall. If that ends up being the case, then I would definitely treat donations as tips if the Trump admin goes on that route, but we'll see if that actually happens or not. Who knows?
To slow the pace. We thought about pausing, and instead we debated. It's one of these great debates that we have at the FOMC. We decided to slow the pace instead, and people really came to see the merits of that because the slower we go, the less the smaller the balance sheet can get without disruptions. And we want that process to continue. And now it's at quite a slow pace. So we think that's a really good thing. So that means it can go on for a longer amount of time, and we'll be able to reach kind of very carefully what we think is the right level of reserves. Still plenty of reserves.
What about the international dollar-based system? With all these disruptions, do you stand ready to supply dollars to central banks as you've done in the past when there's been a global shortage of dollars?
Sure, absolutely we do.
That's, I believe what he's talking about there, supply dollars to banks. I think that's quantitative easing, which I think we started for the first time in 2007, 2008.
Just for everyone's knowledge, we have standing dollar swap lines with 5 large central banks. And they go to
I think
the jurisdictions where there are big overseas dollar funding markets. And in fact, those are overseas markets where, for example, a European or Asian institution is buying an asset-backed security that is backed by loans to American consumers. So in effect, these are loans to American consumers. And we support that. We want to make sure that dollars are available. They need dollar funding to hold those dollar assets.
Oh, wait, never mind. No, this is Eurodollar stuff. Okay, never mind. Whatever he's talking about right now, I don't know the underlying underpinnings of this.
So the way it works is, when needed, we lend to the central bank in dollars, and they pay us back in dollars. They then pay in their currency. They lend on in dollars, and so we take no credit risk or anything like that. And it supports dollar funding markets. Dollar funding markets are very sensitive during times of crisis, and it's very helpful. The reason we do it is it's really good for U.S. Consumers. So we'll continue to do that, just as part of the dollar being a reserve currency, the reserve currency, most important, and we will do that.
You mentioned amongst the issues you were focused on was the U.S. fiscal situation. Well, clearly, U.S. sovereign debt continues to rise. And what are your thoughts on the longer-term implications for interest rates and economic stability? How much further can we go in terms of national debt before we cross a line that might be unsustainable in the long term?
So the U.S. is on U.S.
So this is always a killer question that everybody is alluding to, but nobody really knows the answer to. Is that is there some amount of U.S. debt that's too much? Nobody knows the answer to this question. People have different theories about how much debt can the United States support. At what point is it unsustainable? Does it have to do with the interest rate payment? Does it have to do with the percentage of debt or percentage of interest payment as GDP? A lot of people have different theories about this, but I don't think anybody really knows the answer to this question because our debt has exploded in the past decade.
Federal debt is on an unsustainable path. It's not at an unsustainable level, and no.
What's your difference between QE and OMO? QE stands for quantitative easing, which I think is when the Federal Reserve starts buying back Treasury bonds early to provide liquidity to banks. OMO looks like a smiley face that I would put in a DM to a girl. I don't know what OMO means. I have no idea.
No one really knows how much further we can go. Other countries over time have gone much farther, but we're now, we're running very large deficits at full employment. And this is a situation that we very much need to address. Sooner or later we'll have to, and sooner is better than later. In terms of, if I can say from my time working on these issues, it's not the Fed's issue, but if you look at a pie chart of federal spending.
Is debt only really an issue if other countries get mad at us and try to sell their treasury bonds all at once? I mean, I feel like, I'm saying this as a truism. I'm not going to prove this, but anyway, it just feels intuitive. It must be true, right? Certainly, there must be some level of debt that's just too much, that at some point it becomes unsustainable. I don't know what the answer to that is. I do know that other countries help us sustain our debt, like these countries that, for instance, export more to us than we export to them. So countries that we have high trade deficits with, they hold a lot of U.S. debt because some of that extra money that they have comes back in the form of buying. People in their country will buy U.S. debt. They'll buy U.S. treasuries. So if countries got mad at us and started offloading, whatever our theoretical cap is on how much debt could we handle, whatever that theoretical cap is, we'll hit it much sooner, which should be scary to everybody. But
the biggest parts and the parts that are growing are Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and now interest payments. And so that's really where the work has to be done. And those are issues that can only be touched on a bipartisan basis. Neither party can figure out what to do without both parties being at the table. So that's critical. All of this domestic discretionary spending, which is essentially where 100% of the conversation is.
Wait, somebody said, I thought countries can't sell the treasuries back to the government on their own will. All of it is basically only traded on the secondhand market. That's generally true, but I think QE, quantitative easing is when that happens. However, regardless of a company being able to sell back a treasury to the government or not, you still have to compete with the government. The government still has to compete with secondary markets when they go to sell treasuries. So even if, I don't know what the point is of your question. I don't know if what I just said even addressed what you were bringing up.
Those are issues that can only be touched on a bipartisan basis. Neither party can figure out what to do without both parties being at the table. So that's critical. All of this domestic discretionary spending, which is essentially where 100% of the conversation is small as a percentage of federal spending and is declining. It's already declining as a percentage of federal spending. So when people are focusing on cutting domestic spending, they're not actually working on the problem. Domestic discretionary spending is already going down. I like to make that point because so much of the dialogue that the politicians offer is about domestic discretionary spending, which is not the issue.
Well, let's turn to stability and regulation.
That was an interesting point. He just said domestic discretionary spending is not the issue. So when we talk about the federal budget, we're talking about $1.7-ish trillion of spending. However, the actual federal budget, I think, is in excess of $6 trillion, almost $7 trillion now. But the majority of it, like 66% plus 2/3 of it, is on non-discretionary stuff, meaning stuff like Social Security, interest on the debt, I think Medicare. I don't think Medicaid, but I don't remember how Medicaid is funded exactly. But that non-discretionary is hard because it's non-discretionary. You can't just not pay your debt. You can't just not pay into Social Security. You can't just not make these payments because shit in society would get super fucked really fast. So mandatory is 66%. Our discretionary, which is what Congress fights about every year, is 26%. Discretionary, by the way, includes things like the military. And our interest, I guess, is 8%. The best way, looking at this chart, just like looking at this and thinking like, oh shit, what do we do, is to grow your economy. Growing your economy means more tax receipts. You have to look at the revenue side of things, because your expenditures, you're probably just not going to be able to do much, right? In a way, I would kind of compare this to, although it's not the same exactly because individuals can change, but it's kind of like if all of you are rich, spoiled fucks, so fuck all of you, okay? But when you're a working class Chad, your two huge fucks are rent and your car payment. These are like the two huge things that are just always fucking you every single month. They're your biggest expenditures. They're brutal, and then everything else is kind of like sits inside of that. If you get into a financial situation where you can't afford like your house or your car payment, you're fucked. You're not going to be able to cut from your food budget. You're not going to be able to cut from your cell phone or whatever to pay for your car and house if these are getting like out of control. You're fucked. There's no way that you can deal with that. And the only way you can deal with it is for an individual, you can kind of sell your car, get a smaller one, or you can try to move to a more affordable place. But for the government, we can't do anything about the mandatory spending. You just have to increase your revenues. But the problem is nobody wants to talk about increasing revenues because that means a tax increase, and nobody wants to talk about that. So what establishes the difference between mandatory and discretionary spending? Is it just describing the importance of the spending, or is there a procedural difference? I believe there's a procedural difference in that right now, the Congress, when they do the spending bills or your continuing resolutions, Congress doesn't fund Social Security. Congress doesn't fund interest on the debt. We don't have to do things where we say, oh, are we going to pay interest on the debt this budget? We don't do that. It's non-discretionary. It has to be by law. This stuff is always provided for. The only way that we, in a really roundabout way, fight over non-discretionary spending is when there's a debate on raising the debt ceiling. And that's one of the reasons why that debt ceiling debate is so catastrophic. Because if we don't raise the debt ceiling, then that means that we're going to start to default on our non-discretionary spending, which means that for the first time in all of history, the U.S. is not paying its interest. So like treasury bills, and people wouldn't buy any of our debt, or the U.S. has stopped paying like Social Security or something horrible like that, basically.
Discretionary spending, which is not the issue.
Well, let's turn to stability and regulation. Turning to the U.S. financial sector, we still have some concerns.
I thought Social Security and Medicare/Medicaid are like literal Ponzi schemes. Not that they are going to fall in the future, but that they're paying out like pensions used to. Is Social Security net negative? So if Social Security, quote unquote, collapses and just has an absolute failure, what that means is that when you go to collect Social Security as a young person, you're only going to get like 74% of the payments that are promised to you. That's what a collapsed Social Security means. The idea that Social Security will go completely bankrupt and you're not going to get anything, that's not how Social Security works. That, assuming everybody is paying into it, and people aren't actually literally scamming it or something, you will always get at least that minimum part of your Social Security payout.
About distressed commercial real estate loans on bank balance sheets, whether they've been fully dealt with so far. There's some sense that they haven't. Add to that the very rapid growth in various forms of private credit over the last few years, which arguably haven't been tested by a full-blown recession. How would you put the resilience of our financial institutions at this point and their ability to weather potentially uncertain times?
So I think our banking system is well capitalized with liquidity and is quite resilient right now to the kinds of shocks that it may face. I do believe that. In terms of the commercial real estate, there are, and this has been the case, really we've been working on this for 4 or 5 years now. There are some banks, it's mostly medium and small size banks who have elevated concentrations of commercial real estate, some of it troubled, and we've been working to make sure that those banks have a plan, have capital, and can absorb the losses that they're doing. So that's been going on for some time. The very largest banks don't tend to have high concentrations. So this is a problem that we have known would take years.
Are you pro Social Security? Yes. It's just Americans just can't plan. Nobody can plan for their financial future. So Social Security is just a good safety net to help people, because people suck on average with their finances.
To work through, we're really well into the process of working through it. In terms of the non-bank financial sector, it's grown enormously. The provision of credit by non-banks has grown just really fast. Most of it has been funded, though, with a private equity-like structure where it's limited partners who are signed up for 10 years to a general partner to invest that money. They're not depositors who can run. Your money's committed. And so that funding model is kind of run-proof. That isn't some law of nature, though. So when you do start to see shorter-term funding creeping in, to your point, though, Raghu, this very fast-growing and now quite large private credit part of the economy has not really been through a significant credit event or significant. It's really grown since the pandemic, and so just for that reason and for how fast it's growing, we have a close eye on it. It doesn't have the same kind of prudential regulation, though, that the banking system has. So we're watching it carefully. And as I mentioned, it's a more stable funding source to the extent its institutional investors signed up for a long period. But we're watching carefully.
Right, wearing my banking research hat, actually banks are also involved in funding these institutions in a big way.
Yeah.
We do know the administration wants to relax regulations in many areas, one of which may well be banking. What can you tell us about the Basel III endgame, so to speak, which is, at this point primarily focused on additional capital for the large banks?
The Fed view, in my view, is that we should proceed to complete the Basel III Accord.
I have no idea what that means.
We would have to do that, and would look forward to doing that in conjunction with the FDIC and the OCC.
What do you think about how much personal debt people can get now with stuff like credit cards and payday loans? Should that be allowed? I don't like the concept of payday loans at all. I actually don't think credit cards should even be legal. I just don't think they provide for healthy consumer spending habits, but I don't know. Maybe there should be like a federal cap on how much debt are you allowed to have as a consumer on credit cards. This is kind of anti-freedom though, but I don't know. I think that's insane.
But our view is, and I think the bank's view as well, is we should complete.
Why not upgrade them to EM plants? Oh, wait, because I can make chips from EM plants, can I? Oh, you're right. Fuck. I didn't even think of this.
That you need international minimum standards. That's kind of a common good, and we're not bound by them. Nothing. The United States has plenty of input into what those accords contain. So our view is strongly that we should complete those, and we could do it, I think, relatively quickly. We're not so very far away from.
How much cash should you have by 25? It depends on when you start school, but I would say that a decent 25-year-old with a decent work ethic, I think, could pretty easily have anywhere from $400,000 to $500,000 in the bank, depending on how quickly you pay off your student loans. I would say, yeah,
from what would be a good, I think, outcome.
Well, let me move to something which is more about technological change and new kinds of instruments, cryptocurrencies. How do you see the potential for more favorable regulations coming on them and potential risks from that for the system?
So we went through a wave of failures and fraud and things like that were the headlines for a couple of years. And I think what you see now is, and during that period, by the way, we worked with Congress to try to get a legal framework for stablecoins, which would have been a nice place to start. We were not successful. I think that the climate is changing, and you're moving into sort of more mainstreaming of that whole sector. So Congress is again looking at both the Senate and the House are looking at a legal framework for stablecoins. Depending on what's in it, that's a good idea. We need that. There isn't one now. And stablecoins are a digital product that could actually have fairly wide appeal and should contain consumer protections of the typical sorts and transparency. And that's what the Senate and the House are working on. So that's a positive thing. I also think some of the we took a pretty conservative, and other bank regulators took an even more conservative perspective on the guidance and rules we imposed on banks. I think there'll be some loosening of that, and I think we'll try to do it in a way that preserves safety and soundness, but that permits and fosters appropriate innovation, but that does so in a way that again doesn't put consumers at risk in ways they don't understand or make banks less safe and sound.
You have a policy review underway. Now, surveys recently tell us there seems to be a distinction between a rise in the level of prices, which is what the public seems to worry a lot about, and the rate of increase in prices, which certainly they worry about in passing, but the Fed worries much more about. That is the rate of inflation. So even though we're coming down to 2%, people remember that over the last few years, it's been over 20% increase in prices. So as you start thinking about the policy review, is there any thought about how you might want to address this sort of challenge, that it's the path of prices as much as the rate of change which matters?
First of all, I think you're right, and I think the public is right. When we say inflation is back down to 2%, 2.5%, and we think that's a good thing, it is a good thing. But if you're paying 20% more than you were paying in 2021, that doesn't help you much. You're still paying a lot more than you used to be paying for the necessities of life. So it's just another way of saying people hate inflation, and it's easy to understand why. All we can really control is a world in the world we were living in, prices don't go down in the aggregate except in extreme times that we don't want to court. So I don't think we couldn't have a framework where we're going to bring prices down by 10% or something. That's not something we'll be looking at. We're essentially looking at.
One of the things also, if you took the bait on that, you're actually fucking retarded. But that's okay. I don't know why you watch me. If you think I'm that fucking stupid, why would you watch me as a streamer? If you legitimately think I think you should have 500,000, you're so fucking retarded. You guys are brain broken by lefties. Okay. There are things like actual values, and then there's changes from value to value. right? When you do Calc AB or whatever, you learn these are derivatives, okay? It's a rate of change. When you're talking about a rate of change, all you're talking about is the change from X, 1 to 2 to 2 to 3 to 3 to 4. But it's important to remember that a rate of change, okay, even if it goes to 0, doesn't mean there's not some absolutely felt increase in a particular thing. So when you talk about inflation, when people are saying cumulative effects of inflation, right? Well, what he's talking about right here, inflation, even if the rate of inflation is going down to 2%, the cumulative effect of that inflation will be felt, right? If the rate of change is like 10 from 1 to 2, then you're going from 10 to 20. If the rate of change goes to 8, you'd go from 2 to 3, 20 to 28. If the rate of change now falls to 1 and you go from 28 to 29, and then the rate of change is 1, you go from 29 to 30, the rate of change is 1, you go from 30 to 31. Even though the rate of change has come down, your inflation rate has come down, that absolute increase, that cumulatively felt effect of inflation still remains. You can't bring prices down generally. You can only bring down the rate of change of those prices, is the cumulative effects of inflation, right?
The best way to foster 2% inflation over time. And the things we did back in, the changes we made in 2020 were really innovations around what to do when you're stuck near 0. Now we're well above 0. And it may be that we still need to have in our framework a way to deal with that, but perhaps the main case is not one where you're dealing with the effective lower bound, and that would be a framework that looks a lot more like the one that we had before 2020.
Now, one of the tools you brought in to deal with the zero lower bound was quantitative easing. But you've also used quantitative easing to fix disruptions in the financial markets. Are you going to be more specific about what your objective is with quantitative easing as you go through this review?
So in the beginning, it's typically, we're using it for financial market function. That was the case with the global financial crisis and with the pandemic. And we did try to explain ourselves through the pandemic, and our explanations did change. But I think it's fair to say we might have done a better job of being clear about why we were doing it. And that's something that we're aware of and looking at.
No discussion is complete without talking about AI.
Yeah.
With AI coming fast and furious, it could affect productivity, it could affect employment. There are some people who say we will see for the first time technological unemployment in a serious way with AI. What are your thoughts about it, and how will it impact the Fed going forward?
So like everyone who's been exposed to what it's capable of, it's beyond, I started thinking about it as like a better version of Google, but it's not. It's like a better version of a person, it can do amazing things. And so the question is, all through the 250 years of technological innovation, technology evolves and people worry that it's going to replace human labor and people will be unemployed. And that hasn't been the case. It may be the case in the short run, but in the long run, what it's done is raise human productivity and therefore living standards.
He's talking about this is like the lump of labor fallacy. There are people that assume that if some technological innovation happens, it's going to replace all of the human workers. And once those workers are replaced, we no longer have a need for them. And then there's going to be mass unemployment, which is really bad. However, the way that it tends to go historically is even though some new technological innovation opens up, what happens is people learn to use that technological innovation, and then the productivity grows, where productivity is defined as your amount of stuff that you can make per labor hour. And then people just find new ways to work with these existing technologies. There's always this kind of like boogeyman that there's going to be some new technology where the lump of labor fallacy no longer applies. And you actually do run into an issue where people just don't have work anymore. It hasn't happened yet, but people are worried that maybe with AI, maybe this will be the thing that finally makes it happen.
So is this going to be the case where it eliminates more jobs than it creates? And we just don't know. You come back in 20 years, will it be the case that just people are much more productive in their work because of AI? Or will it be the case that AI has just replaced a lot of people? And I think it's very hard to say, but it truly is remarkable in what it's capable of. And it's, we had a demonstration by a Wharton professor recently, and you speak to it like it's a person. And it kind of responds like a person. And the things that it can do are really amazing. By the way, this is early days. They're talking about even the next couple of years will bring more dramatic breakthroughs. So I think it's one of the 2 or 3 things most likely to bring dramatic change to the economy all around the world in the next 20 years. And I'd say very hard to say how it shakes out.
Let me turn to your job. An important man once said of your job, it's the greatest job in...
I don't know if it'd be a dumb idea, but for anything else, it'd be cool to hire a mixologist/bartender to make drinks for you guys based off of current events. Maybe.
Government. You show up to office once a month and you say, let's see, flip a coin. And then everybody talks about you like you're a god. What is it that you normally do every day in the office? Is it fulfilling and, dare I say, enjoyable? And do you really feel like a god?
So I would agree. I think it's the best job in government. I would agree.
I would agree.
I really
I
do
am a
enjoy
job.
it. Yes.
Or I am a
I love the
job.
job.
Fuck.
It's a great honor to serve. It's quite humbling because everybody makes mistakes. It's just the economy is just not very predictable. All of that is true, and I do what everybody expects me to do. We do a little more reading though as part of our daily. My colleagues and I do part of our daily regime than a typical executive would do. In terms of being a god, I would say that we are blessed with a large number of amply compensated critics who would kind of tend to undercut that. So we don't feel like a god.
So let me go to the more mundane. In that office, what are the key indicators you look for? What are the sources of data that you go to as you try and make up your mind?
So, I'd say start with labor. There's more labor market data and better reliable labor market data than probably anywhere else, and just a lot of data. And, it's new jobs, it's payroll, it's wages, it's participation. You can break all of those down in different categories. It's a million different things. So there's a lot of labor market data. It's a great field if you're going into economics because there's just so much to do. So then we look at the inflation data. Also, I keep track of global developments pretty carefully, and I talk to my global counterparts pretty regularly just to stay aware of what's going on. Financial markets are really important, and and lately something that we're paying close attention to, as you would expect, what's going on around the world in currency markets, and fixed income markets, and equity markets, all of that. For me, though, my background was more in the private sector, and as an investor, and for a significant part of my career, and I have to talk to outsiders about what they're seeing and what they're dealing with for it to really kind of fit together for me. I can look at only so much data, and but to really get the story and the narrative, it's more talking to outsiders, and anecdotal data does help things kind of fit together for me, I would say.
Yeah, you told us about speaking with business people last night and getting a sense of what was going on in the Midwest. Let me turn to Fed independence. You've reiterated that you intend to stay in office until the end of your term, and that certainly reassured many in financial markets. What are the levers the government or the legislature have to pressure the Fed? And should one worry about threats to the Fed's independence once you're gone?
So our independence is a matter of law. Congress has, in our statute, we're not removable except for cause. We serve very long terms, seemingly endless terms.
How did Trump pick, of all people, Powell? No, Powell wasn't picked initially by Trump. I don't know who first put Powell in. But once a Fed Reserve Chair is in, I think they just put in over and over and over again. Was it Obama? Obama, then Trump, then Biden. Yeah. You don't usually mess with this.
So we're protected in the law. So Congress could change that law, but I don't think there's any danger of that. Fed independence has pretty broad support across both political parties and in both sides of the hill. So I think that's not a problem. There's a Supreme Court case people will have read probably in today's journal at which the Supreme Court may decide whether independent agencies generally, whether their authorizing laws can contain a provision that prevents the president from firing members of a commission other than for cause. And that's a case that people are talking about a lot. I don't think that decision will apply to the Fed, but I don't know. It's a situation that we're monitoring carefully. Generally speaking, Fed independence is very widely understood and supported in Washington, in Congress, where it really matters. And the point is, we can make our decisions, and we will only make our decisions based on our best thinking, based on our best analysis of the data about what is the way to achieve our dual mandate.
What guardrails exist in case the next guy is a lunatic? I'm not sure, and I don't know if there are any. Good luck.
Goals as we can to best serve the American people. That's the only thing we're ever going to do. We're never going to be influenced by any political pressure. People can say whatever they want. That's fine. That's not a problem. But we will do what we do strictly without consideration of political or any other extraneous factors.
Clappa. People hope that's true.
Well, I have time for one more question. I'm not going to ask that question. The question I want to ask is a more personal one. What is it that you like to do most at home after an exhausting day flipping coins in the office?
I play one of my guitars. I do Zoom calls with my kids and my grandkids, and I go to the gym a lot too, just to stay in shape.
Damn.
We need you healthy. We need you healthy. Thank you very much, Chair Powell.
Thank you.
And please join me.
On behalf of the Economic Club of Chicago, thank you, Chair Powell and Dr. Rajan, for such a wonderful...
Okay, I love this lady. I've heard her speak a couple times now. Her voice absolutely sounds like it's a little bit modulated by some type of...
On behalf of the Economic Club of Chicago, thank you, Chair Powell and Dr. Rajan, for such a wonderful conversation. You are a national treasure, and I hope all of us can see how important Chair Powell's role is.
Why does the U.S. have such a low voter turnout compared to other countries? I don't know if we do or not, do we? I know our turnout is considered low. I don't know what other countries look like. Our average population is kind of not very civically minded, I guess. And also, I I don't know if this is normal in other countries, but we don't have like a national voter day. Like when you vote, you have to ask to get off work and hope that your boss actually lets you off. You have to make time to do it. Like it's just kind of, yeah. We just don't I guess we don't value voting that much as a people or something. I don't know.